My family wanted me to plan my vacation around my sister and her kids, and they were furious when I didn't. My name is Catherine McPhee. I'm 39 years old. I live in Santa Barbara, California, and I work as a senior creative producer for a major hospitality brand. I've spent the past 15 years helping others chase their dream vacations, curating campaigns about Tuscan vineyards, Icelandic waterfalls, and hidden Kyoto tea houses. But the truth was, I had never taken more than 5 days off in a row for myself, until this year. After saving for nearly 3 years, I finally booked a solo trip to Morocco. A desert retreat, a week of digital silence hammam steam baths, cooking classes in Fez, and a quiet climb through the Atlas Mountains. No meetings, no clients, no compromises. Just me, and the version of myself I barely recognized anymore. The deposit was paid the out-of-office set. My therapist said it was the most grounded she had seen me in years. I was proud of myself. I thought my family would be too. But the moment I shared the news during Sunday brunch, the room turned cold. My younger sister Emily, 36, mother of twins, recently divorced, pushed her fork aside and blinked. Morocco. In June. That's when I was planning the family beach trip with the kids. You knew that, didn't you? I hadn't. I truly hadn't. I hadn't checked with anyone, because for once, I wasn't scheduling around anyone else's life. I was finally listening to my own. My mom's smile tightened. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just postpone it a few weeks? You know how much those boys adore you. My dad nodded, not looking at me. We haven't had a real family trip in years, Catherine. This is important. I remember gripping my napkin so hard it tore in half. I tried to explain that I'd already booked everything. That I'd chosen the dates, because they aligned with the spiritual calendar of the Sufi guides I'd be traveling with. I explained it calmly. I even showed them the brochure, but it didn't matter. Emily said she'd already started planning around my availability, assuming I'd make it work like always. That night I got a series of guilt-laced texts from my mother. She hoped I wasn't becoming one of those self-centered types. My father sent me a photo of the twins with a note. They asked why their Aunt Kate won't be there. I didn't know what to say. I barely slept that week. The pressure was suffocating and the message was loud. My plans didn't count. My rest didn't matter. Once again, I was expected to contort my life around everyone else's needs. The part that hurt the most, they didn't even ask how I was doing. No one asked why I needed the trip. No one saw how burned out I'd become, how I cried after client calls, or how I started drinking wine at 3 p.m. just to make it through the day. I wish I could say I held my ground with confidence, but the truth is I started to waver. I found myself looking up cancellation policies, calculating how much I'd lose. I even started a new search for family-friendly destinations in June. For a few days I fell right back into the old role. The fixer, the invisible one, the good daughter who bends. But then something happened, something small, something real, and it made me stop everything. You see, I found an old voicemail from my grandmother, the one person who never asked me to be anything but myself. She said, "You don't have to prove your worth to people who love you right, Katie girl. If they can't see your joy, don't dim it to match their shadow." That was the moment something shifted. I realized that this trip to Morocco wasn't just a vacation. It was a boundary. A line in the sand between who I used to be and who I was finally ready to become. And that's when the real war began, not on flights or deposits but inside the walls of my own family. A war I didn't start, but one I was finally willing to fight. After that brunch, I thought the storm might pass if I just stayed silent, but instead it grew stronger behind closed doors. Within days, the group texts from my family took on a different tone, not direct attacks but carefully curated guilt. My mom sent a photo of Emily's boys building sandcastles at the local beach with the caption, "Wish Aunt Katie were here." Emily forwarded me a list of potential Airbnbs for their beach week and casually added, "I already told the kids you'd be joining, they're so excited." It was as if my decision to go to Morocco hadn't happened at all. I wasn't being confronted, I was being erased and replaced with an obedient version of me that never gave anyone trouble. But the part that truly stung, no one asked me why I needed this trip. No one asked how I was feeling. To them it was selfish indulgence. To me it was survival. I'd been burning out for years, slowly unraveling behind cheerful campaign launches and branded content. I was working 70 hours a week, barely sleeping, drinking coffee for breakfast and wine for dinner. I kept telling myself I was fine, because everyone else needed me to be fine. And then when I finally reached the breaking point and chose rest, they acted like I had betrayed them. I didn't respond to their messages right away. I needed time to think. I spoke with my mentor at work, Stephanie, a woman in her 50s who'd lived through her own share of family guilt. When I explained the situation, she looked at me for a long time before saying, "This isn't about the vacation, this is about the role you've always played. The moment you step out of it, they panic. Because you choosing yourself means they lose their convenient fallback. And that scares them more than they'll ever admit." That stayed with me. I had been so used to being the reliable one, the available one, the one who didn't rock the boat that I hadn't realized how much of my identity they had built around that. The moment I tried to change, they didn't just resist, they retaliated. It started subtly. My aunt called one evening pretending to check in, but soon shifted into concerned questions. "Is everything okay, Catherine? You've always been so dependable. I hope you're not going through some phase. We all need each other, especially now. Emily's going through so much." She never once asked what I was going through. Just like that, my fatigue, my anxiety, my burnout, they were invisible. The next day, my dad called and asked me to think of the bigger picture. He reminded me of the family legacy, the traditions, how we always showed up for each other. I asked him calmly, "Did anyone ask me what I needed this year?" There was a pause. Then he sighed. "You've always been strong. We thought you didn't need anything. And maybe that was the root of it. In their eyes, I didn't have needs. I had responsibilities." That week I started having migraines again. I could barely focus at work. I skipped meals, didn't sleep. The mental pressure of carrying their disappointment while holding on to my decision was heavier than I expected. But I also knew what it would cost me to back down. Not just the lost money or the canceled plans, but something deeper, my own self-respect. If I gave in now, after years of saying yes out of obligation, I'd lose the one thing this trip represented that I mattered to. The manipulation intensified. Emily sent a voice note from her son asking if Aunt Katie was mad at them. I knew she had coached him because he was 6 and barely understood the concept of a calendar, let alone my travel plans. But hearing his voice broke something in me. I cried that night not because I felt guilty, but because I realized how thoroughly my family had blurred the lines between love and control. I was being asked to prove loyalty through self-erasure. That's when I called my therapist, Danielle, for an emergency session. I told her everything, the texts, the expectations, the pain of being treated like an afterthought unless I was playing support staff to everyone else's needs. She let me finish, then said, "Your family's love has always come with a cost. You've just never paused long enough to see the receipt." That hit harder than anything. Because it was true. I had been paying for love with silence, flexibility, and exhaustion. And this time I wasn't willing to pay anymore. The next morning I bought a new suitcase. I sat on my balcony sipping coffee, watching the coastal fog roll over Santa Barbara, and I wrote a short message to the family group chat. "I will be going to Morocco as planned. I love you all. But this is something I need to do for me. Please respect my decision." Then, I muted the chat. And for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders lower and my lungs expand. They weren't going to like it. They were probably already planning their next move. But I wasn't going to fold this time. Because this wasn't just a trip. It was the first time I said yes to myself without asking for permission. And I was prepared to face whatever came next to protect that. A day after I sent the message confirming my trip, the silence from my family was almost louder than their guilt. No replies, no acknowledgement. Just that hollow space where a storm was clearly gathering. For about 48 hours, I let myself believe maybe they'd accepted my decision. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But I should have known better. On Friday evening, I received a text from my cousin Rachel. It was a screenshot of a new group thread. I wasn't part of one that included my sister, my parents, and several extended relatives. At the top of the thread, "What do we do about Catherine?" Below it, a stream of passive-aggressive planning unfolded. Comments like, "Maybe if we all explain how much it means to the boys, she'll come around," and It's not like she has a husband or kids. She can reschedule. But the line that cut the deepest came from my mother. I'm starting to worry she's not well. Maybe she needs help. She's never been this distant. That one stung. Not because they misunderstood me, but because they were using concern as camouflage for control. I stared at that message for a long time, and for a second I almost felt shame creep in. That old reflex to apologize, to smooth things over, to explain myself. But then I remembered something Danielle said in our session. People who rely on your compliance will always mistake your boundaries for rebellion. This wasn't rebellion, it was clarity. It was the quiet act of choosing myself. But what shocked me wasn't just the private messages. It was how fast the narrative spread beyond the family. That weekend, 2 friends from college texted me after seeing a vague Facebook post from Emily. Family isn't just blood, it's who shows up for your kids when it counts. She wrote, tagging our mother and posting photos of beach gear, with the caption, "Making new memories with the ones who matter." I hadn't realized until then how deep the performance ran. They weren't just hurt. They were crafting a version of the story where I was the villain, the selfish career woman who turned her back on family for a luxury trip abroad. And the truth was, it worked on some people. My Uncle Steve left me a voicemail I didn't ask for. "I'm disappointed in you, Catherine. We raised you better than this. Family comes first." I never responded. Because trying to argue with someone committed to misunderstanding you is like shouting into the ocean. I just let it be. But the worst moment came when I bumped into my neighbor Julie, a retired teacher who always asked about my family. "I heard you're not joining the big family trip this year," she said gently. "Everything okay?" Her tone was kind, but it confirmed what I suspected. My absence wasn't just a private choice anymore. It had become public discussion. And not in the way I'd hoped. Still, I stayed grounded. I continued prepping for Morocco, renewed my passport, printed out my itinerary, and even began packing in small bursts after work. I started learning Moroccan Arabic phrases with the same enthusiasm I used to apply to campaign slogans. But beneath the excitement there was this persistent ache. Not regret, not guilt, something quieter. Grief. I was grieving the version of family I had tried to hold on to for so long, the image of being seen, appreciated, understood. It wasn't just about the vacation anymore, it was about every birthday I had rescheduled to babysit, every canceled date night to help Emily during a kid emergency, every time I accepted being second place, because that's what good daughters did. I tried not to let it show at work, but one morning Stephanie pulled me aside. "You're doing the right thing, you know," she said, handing me a coffee. "They're just not used to you having boundaries. That doesn't make you wrong. It makes you brave." And I needed that reminder. Because bravery doesn't always feel bold. Sometimes it feels like nausea before dinner, or the quiet shake in your hands when you hit mute on a family group chat. That weekend, I hosted Samantha for dinner. She asked how everything was going, and I gave her the full update, screenshots and all. She listened without interruption. Then she said something I'll never forget. "They're pushing so hard because your choice exposes the system. You were the one who never said no. Now you are, and it terrifies them." That night I wrote in my journal, "My no is not a betrayal. It's a boundary. And it's overdue." I knew the days leading up to my flight would only intensify the pressure. I could already sense the next move coming. Another intervention, another emotional ambush disguised as concern. But I also knew something they didn't. I wasn't folding this time. They could talk, they could twist the story, they could perform their disappointment for the world. But they couldn't make me erase myself again. Because when someone finally chooses their own voice after years of silence, that sound echoes longer than any guilt trip ever could. 3 days before my flight, I got a message from my father. Family dinner. No excuses. Sunday at 6. No explanation, no warmth, just a command. It wasn't unusual for my dad to speak that way. He was a retired judge used to people obeying. For years I'd answered that tone with automatic compliance. This time I paused. I knew what was waiting. Another concerned gathering. Another round of emotional chess played with polite voices and loaded questions. But I also knew if I didn't show up, they'd use my absence as more proof of my selfishness. So I went, but I didn't go unarmed. That Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6. I wore a simple navy dress and carried nothing but a folder and my phone. As I stepped into the living room, I saw them all. My parents, Emily, my Aunt Karen, Uncle Dean, and even Rachel, each positioned like a jury, waiting to hear a confession. Emily was already tearing up, though I hadn't said a word. My mother gestured to the couch, like a peace offering. "Come sit, honey. We just want to talk." The moment I sat down, my father launched in. "Catherine, we've watched you drift further and further from this family, and it's time we addressed it. This trip is the latest in a long pattern of behavior. You're isolating yourself." I stayed quiet. He continued. "You didn't come to Jake's birthday last fall. You missed Christmas Eve dinner, and now you're choosing some spiritual retreat in the desert over your family. This isn't you." I took a deep breath and looked at him, then at everyone else. "It is me. It's just not the version of me you're used to." That silenced the room for a moment. My mother leaned forward. "We're just worried, sweetheart. You've always been so stable, so generous, and now you're distant." I pulled out the folder and handed it to her. Inside were printed emails, booking confirmations, and a letter from my doctor from 3 months ago. This trip was recommended for medical reasons. Stress, burnout, physical exhaustion. I didn't want to make this about health, but since you're also concerned about me being distant, here it is. My mother's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. I had no idea. I nodded. "Because no one asked. You assumed I was choosing against you, when in truth I was choosing for myself. Something I've never done before without guilt." Emily stood up. "So we're the villains now, just because we wanted to include you," her voice shook. "You act like we're monsters, but you're the one turning your back on us." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't angry. She was desperate. "I'm not turning my back. I'm stepping out of a role I never auditioned for. I love this family, but not at the cost of myself. I won't keep paying that price." My father crossed his arms. "So you're still going?" I nodded. "I am. My flight is booked. My bags are packed. And no amount of shame disguised as love will change that." The room tensed again. But instead of defending myself further, I did something unexpected. I asked a question. "What would you say if Emily took 2 weeks alone to recharge in silence? No kids, no expectations. Just time for herself." The room went quiet. My dad shifted. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. No one answered, and in their silence I saw it clearly. Their resistance wasn't about the trip, it was about their loss of control. I stood up and said I came tonight because I didn't want my silence to be misunderstood, but I'm done justifying my choices to people who only support me when I'm convenient. I walked to the door. Emily called after me. "What should we tell the kids?" I paused. "Tell them I love them, and tell them I'll see them when I'm back with stories, with souvenirs, with the same love I've always had. But from now on, it'll be love with boundaries." And with that I left. No raised voice, no meltdown. Just quiet resolve. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the ocean fog roll in, and for the first time in my adult life I felt free. Not because I won the argument, but because I no longer needed to win anything. I wasn't trying to be understood. I was simply being honest. And that kind of freedom, it's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's unforgettable. The next time I'd walk into that house, I would no longer be the version of myself they created. I'd be the version I chose. And there was no going back. The morning of my flight arrived like a slow breath before a storm. The sun broke through the coastal fog, pouring soft light over my small apartment, illuminating my packed suitcase by the door. I had checked everything twice: passport, tickets, itinerary. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and listened to the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of all the things I used to carry: guilt, fear, the constant second-guessing, but now it was still. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was abandoning anyone. I felt like I was returning to someone. Me. 10 minutes before my rideshare arrived, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I didn't answer. Then a second call. Emily. Then a third from my dad. No voicemails, no texts. Just a sudden burst of urgency that had been suspiciously absent in the days before. I slipped the phone into my bag, zipped it up, and walked out without looking back. I knew exactly what was happening. Their silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. They'd gone quiet, waiting until the last possible moment to reel me back in. To create a last-minute crisis they hoped would shake me into changing my mind. But I was already gone, not just from the apartment. From the version of myself who needed their permission. In the back seat of the car heading toward LAX, the city passed me in fragments. Familiar coffee shops, the park where I used to jog before work, the ad agency billboard I once helped design. All pieces of a life that looked successful from the outside, but was quietly suffocating on the inside. I opened my journal and wrote 3 words. I chose me. Then I closed it. That was enough. At the airport, I stood in line surrounded by families headed to tropical resorts and couples taking selfies under departure signs. No one looked like me. A woman in her late 30s traveling alone without matching luggage, or someone waiting at the other end. But for once I didn't feel like the odd one out. I felt solid, clear, unapologetic. The woman at the counter smiled as she handed me my boarding pass. Morocco. Wow, that's a journey. I nodded and smiled back. Yeah, it is. I reached the gate an hour early and found a quiet seat near the window. I turned my phone back on briefly, just to send one text. It was to the family group chat. I wrote, boarding soon. I'm safe. I'm calm. I love you. I'll be offline for the next 2 weeks. I hope you all find peace too. Then I powered the phone off completely. Not airplane mode. Off. I wasn't giving them a back door into my mind while I tried to heal. As we took off, I stared out the window at the city shrinking below. Somewhere down there, my family was probably gathered in a living room wondering how I could walk away so easily. But what they never understood was that this choice wasn't easy. It was necessary. I had spent years bending, years apologizing for having a schedule, a boundary, a life that didn't revolve around them. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was the final step in 1,000 small ones they never saw. Landing in Morocco felt surreal. The air was warm and dry, perfumed with mint and dust. The chaos of the Marrakech Medina was a shock to the senses, but in a good way. I wasn't being asked to solve anyone's problems here. No one needed me to cancel anything. I could just be. I wandered alleys filled with color, drank tea with strangers, who asked nothing of me, and sat in silence longer than I had in years. My mind, once buzzing with obligations and what-ifs, began to slow. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in months. I didn't dream about beach trips or angry texts. I dreamed of stars over the desert and waves against the cliffs in Essaouira. On the 4th night, during a rooftop dinner, I met a woman named Elise. She was 50, from Toronto, traveling solo after divorcing her husband of 25 years. We talked about starting over. About choosing your own story, after decades of living in someone else's. She said something that stayed with me. You didn't leave them, Catherine. You just stopped letting them hold you hostage. I wrote that down too. Meanwhile, back home, according to Rachel's quiet updates, the family trip went ahead. The same filtered photos of beach days and matching t-shirts filled my feed when I finally checked it days later. But there was a hollowness in the captions. Making memories, one read. Family forever. No mention of me. No direct jabs. But the omission was loud. I didn't feel sad. I felt honest. Because what they were mourning wasn't my absence. It was their lack of control. And what I gained in return was something no apology could match. A quiet, unshakable reminder that the first time you choose yourself is the moment everything else begins to change. The moment my return flight touched down in California, I braced myself. Not for jet lag, not for the emails waiting in my inbox, but for the quiet war I knew was coming. My family didn't yell when they were upset. They didn't confront directly. They weaponized silence, and they did it well. As I rolled my suitcase into my apartment just past midnight, I checked my phone. No messages. No welcome home. No inquiry about whether I made it back safely. 2 weeks away off the grid, and not a single person in my family reached out when they knew exactly when I was landing. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was intention. I sat on the edge of my bed and let that fact land. Old me would have spiraled. Would have texted them first, trying to fix the discomfort, bridge the gap, earn back warmth. But this version of me, The one who had stood barefoot on ancient mosaic floors, who had watched stars melt into desert skies, who had felt her body soften under hot stones and silence. She didn't beg for scraps of connection anymore. She waited. The next day, I returned to the office. My team greeted me with hugs and stories. Stephanie took one look at me and said, "You look lighter, like something finally let go." She wasn't wrong. My body felt different. My voice steadier. Even the way I moved through the hallways had changed. I wasn't performing peace. I had found it. But later that afternoon I received a DM from Emily. Just a photo. Her kids at Disneyland with a caption, "Wish you had been there," they kept asking. No hello. No real check-in. Just a carefully crafted dagger designed to remind me what I had missed. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. That message wasn't for reconnection. It was punishment disguised as sentiment, and I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. The silence continued for a week, then two. I checked in occasionally with Rachel, who confirmed what I suspected. My absence had become the new family myth. At dinners, I was referred to vaguely as off doing her own thing. At one point, my dad reportedly said, "She'll come around when she realizes how much she needs us." It was always the same story. My choices weren't adult decisions. They were framed as phases, mistakes, or worse, rebellion. It would have hurt if I still saw them as authorities over my value, but I didn't. Instead of folding under their disapproval, I poured myself into life. I started going to a weekend photography class, inspired by the color and contrast of Morocco. I scheduled a standing Wednesday dinner with Samantha. I deep cleaned my apartment, rearranged furniture, and donated half my closet. Everything that no longer fit physically, emotionally was gone. Not in some Pinterest-worthy purge, just quietly, intentionally. Because my space needed to reflect my shift. Clean, unapologetic, clear. About a month after I returned, I got an email from my mother. The subject line simply said Thanksgiving. The message read, "Planning early this year. Let us know if you'll be joining. It'll be at Emily's party. We're trying to keep it small. Just family." I stared at that phrase for a while. Just family. The implication wasn't subtle. I hadn't been behaving like just family, so this was their way of extending a conditional invitation. An invitation with a silent test. Come and fall back in line. Or don't, and risk being written out completely. I closed the email and went for a walk. As I moved through the neighborhood past families unloading groceries and couples watering their lawns, I thought about what Thanksgiving had meant in our house growing up. It was always full of noise. Food. Performances. Emily would bring her pies. My dad would carve the turkey. My mom would hover orchestrating compliments. And I always, the background daughter, would pour wine off her help and quietly disappear into the cleanup. Every year I left feeling invisible. This year I had the option to change that. Not by forcing a seat at their table, but by choosing one of my own. 2 days later, I replied to the email with 3 sentences. "Thank you for the invite. I won't be attending this year. I wish you all well. No anger, no explanation, just a boundary, a declaration. A quiet refusal to perform loyalty in a space where love came with conditions." The next morning, Emily sent a single emoji. A thumbs up. My mom followed with understood. That was it. But I didn't need more. Their silence no longer controlled me. Because, here's what I'd learned, sometimes, the punishment they offer isn't loss, it's space. And if you're strong enough to stand inside it, you begin to see clearly what you were missing all along. Not family, but freedom. Thanksgiving came and went in California with clear skies and a soft wind blowing in from the coast. I spent the morning walking by the ocean, sipping coffee from a local cafe, and later curled up in my apartment with roasted vegetables, a bottle of Pinot Noir, and a book I'd been meaning to finish since July. There was no turkey. No matching table settings. No performance. No one asking me why I was still single, or suggesting I should be more available for Emily's kids. Just quiet, warmth, and peace. The kind that isn't flashy or dramatic, but slow, steady, and earned. The family posted their usual holiday pictures, of course. Emily stood front and center, flanked by her twins in pumpkin-colored sweaters. My dad carved the turkey while my mom smiled tight at the camera. The caption read, "Grateful for those who show up. Just family this year." The phrase landed like a brick, but it didn't break anything. I let myself feel the sting for a second, then let it go. I wasn't going to spend another year trying to prove my value to people who only noticed me when I was useful. I didn't respond. I didn't text back, and I didn't feel guilty. Instead, something unexpected happened. A few days later, I got a handwritten card in the mail. No name on the envelope, just Catherine, in looping cursive. Inside was a short note from my cousin Nora, who had married into the family years ago and had always stayed slightly outside the drama. She wrote, "I saw your Morocco photos. You looked calm in a way I've never seen before. I don't know what you're walking through, but I hope you keep going. Some of us see you even when others pretend not to." I read that note 3 times. It wasn't long or elaborate, but it was real. And that kind of quiet acknowledgement meant more to me than all the performative family dinners I'd ever sat through. As December rolled in, the invitations slowed. No one asked if I'd be joining the Christmas Eve dinner. No group chat updates. No pressure to pick up stocking stuffers for the kids. The vacuum was noticeable. But so was the space it created. With that space, I made new plans. I hosted Samantha for a quiet night of wine and music. I reconnected with a college friend I hadn't seen in 7 years, and we spent an afternoon hiking in Topanga, sharing stories we never had time to finish back when our lives were dictated by other people's expectations. Slowly, I started building something that resembled a life. Not a perfect one, not a curated highlight reel, but something grounded, chosen, deliberate. At work, my energy returned. Not all at once, but in waves. The fog of resentment and fatigue had lifted just enough that I started pitching ideas again. I led a project based on cultural aesthetics I'd seen in Morocco: burnt clay, blue mosaic, soft, natural light, and our client loved it. One afternoon, Stephanie pulled me aside and said, "You know the way you held your ground this year. That's what leadership looks like. Not just at work. In life." I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded, because part of me still struggled to accept that self-respect could be visible. That people might actually admire the version of me who didn't bend over backward to please everyone. But the turning point came just before New Year's. I was heading out of a bookstore when I saw my dad sitting alone on a bench by the fountain across the plaza. He didn't see me right away. He looked older somehow. Tired. When our eyes finally met, he gave a small wave and stood. I hesitated, then walked over. We made small talk. Weather. Work. Then he cleared his throat and said, "I guess we weren't ready for the new version of you. But that's not your fault." I blinked, unsure what to say. He added, "You were always so capable, Catherine. We didn't think you needed space. Turns out you did. Maybe we just didn't want to admit that you'd outgrown how we treated you." That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever gotten from my father, and I took it for what it was. Not a magic fix, but a crack in the armor. A possibility. I nodded slowly. I didn't want to walk away. I just wanted to be seen. He looked down and said, "Yeah, we should have looked closer." We didn't hug. There were no tears. But we stood there in the cold for a long moment, and it felt like the first breath of something different. Something earned, maybe even something real. A week into January, Emily called. Not a text, not a voice memo disguised as guilt. A real phone call. I didn't answer. I let it ring, then watched the voicemail icon appear. I waited. Not because I was punishing her, but because for the first time in our lives I was no longer reacting from obligation. I was observing. When I finally played the message, her voice was subdued. "I know we've had our differences this year. And I know you felt like we didn't support you. Maybe we didn't. But the boys miss you. I miss you. I don't know where we stand anymore, but I guess I just wanted you to know that." I sat with that. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't undo the manipulation, the group texts, or the Facebook captions, but it was something. A sliver of honesty. A signal that perhaps for once Emily had sat with her discomfort instead of lashing out. I didn't respond right away. I gave it a day. Then I called her. When she picked up, she jumped in with, "I didn't expect you to call back," I said. That's exactly why I did. What followed wasn't a confrontation, it was a conversation we should have had years ago. She told me she had felt abandoned, that when I chose not to come on the trip, it felt like rejection. I told her I felt invisible, that being expected to cancel my plans without question wasn't family, it was control. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't think I ever realized how much we relied on you to hold things together. I just assumed you'd be there because you always were." I replied. And I assumed that being there meant I mattered. But I was wrong too. I should have spoken up sooner. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful breakthrough, just two women tired of repeating a pattern that left them both feeling resentful and unseen. We talked for an hour. By the end, there was no promise to fix everything, just a shared understanding that something had shifted, and maybe that was enough. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the ripple effects. My mother started texting without conditions. Simple things like, "Hope you're having a good week," without the usual undercurrent of expectation. My father, who rarely initiated contact, sent me an article about travel photography with the note, "Thought of you." These were small gestures, but they were different. They weren't transactional. They weren't bait. They were just honest. At work, the energy was different too. I felt more grounded in meetings. I said no to unreasonable timelines without guilt. I stopped over-explaining when I took a personal day. One afternoon I had coffee with Stephanie, and she said, "You know what's wild? You're not louder now, you're just clearer. And people finally hear you." That stuck with me. Because for so long I thought I had to shout to be heard. Turns out I just had to stop whispering. By late February, the tension that used to cloud my Sundays had lifted. I no longer braced myself for family drama disguised as dinner invitations. Instead, I started creating my own rituals. I joined a local writing group. I began mentoring a younger colleague who reminded me so much of who I used to be: smart, capable, constantly bending. I told her, "You can be kind and still say no." She looked at me like I had handed her something she didn't know she was allowed to hold. And maybe I had. One weekend, I met up with Nora, the cousin who'd sent me the handwritten card. Over coffee, she told me that after watching how I handled everything, she'd started setting boundaries with her in-laws for the first time in years. "It's uncomfortable," she said, "but it's the most peace I've had in a decade." We laughed about how it always starts with something small: declining one event, keeping one weekend to yourself, and how that one small act can start to unravel decades of quiet resentment. By the time spring rolled in, something had become very clear. My family hadn't changed overnight, but their access to me had. Not in anger, not out of spite, but because I no longer measured love by how much I could tolerate, and they were starting to understand that if they wanted to be close to me, they had to meet me at my boundaries, not trample over them. There was a kind of power in that. Quiet, not performative, not cruel, just stable, steady, rooted. Because once you've remembered who you are beneath the noise of obligation, you stop flinching every time someone calls your name from a version of your past you've already outgrown. By the time April came around, something subtle but important had happened. I no longer flinched when I saw their names pop up on my phone. The tightness in my chest that used to follow every family gathering had faded. Not because things had magically healed, but because I had shifted the way I responded to everything. I didn't explain myself to people who weren't listening. I didn't try to win back respect that should have been given freely. And I didn't let silence from them feel like failure in me. That's the part they never understood. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was trying to breathe. One Friday afternoon, my boss pulled me into a private meeting. He told me I was being considered for a regional leadership role, something that would give me oversight over multiple creative teams across the West Coast. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I was quiet. Not because I didn't want it, but because I was finally learning that not every opportunity had to be seized out of fear it might disappear. I took the weekend to think. I went for long walks along the cliffs, journaled by the ocean, and asked myself one question I'd never asked before accepting any promotion. Will this support the life I'm building, or pull me back into one I've already left behind? I said yes, but with terms. I asked for 2 protected weeks each quarter for travel and mental reset. I asked for the authority to restructure our team to prevent burnout. And I asked for clarity around decision-making, so I wouldn't be expected to absorb silent labor the way I always had. To my surprise, they agreed. Not just politely, eagerly. That's the thing about boundaries. The people who respect you will adapt. The ones who don't will call you difficult. Later that month, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Just 6 people. No forced smiles. No power dynamics. Samantha came, of course. So did Nora. My friend Leo from the photography class brought a lemon tart and a bottle of wine. There was music, mismatched plates, and no one asked me why I hadn't called my mother lately. The night ended with us sitting on the floor laughing about childhood memories that didn't hurt. And for the first time, I realized what real family feels like. It's not about obligation. It's about being seen. In May, I got another message from Emily. This time, it was different. Jake has a school art show next Thursday. He asked if you might come. No pressure, just wanted to extend the invite. That was it. No strings. No guilt. Just a simple choice. I read it twice, then replied, "Thanks for the invite. I'll be there." And I meant it. Because this time it wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing up with agency, not expectation. I arrived at the school early, brought Jake a small notebook from Morocco, and sat quietly in the second row. Emily hugged me afterward. Not tightly, not like she was trying to pull me back into anything. Just enough to say, "I see you now," and maybe that was all I ever wanted. A week later, my mom called. This time her voice was slower, softer. She told me she was thinking about joining a painting class, something she'd always wanted to try. I encouraged her. And when she asked if we might take one together, I paused. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to make sure the invitation was coming from connection, not correction. She added, "Only if you're up for it. I know I've missed a lot when it comes to you. I'm still learning." And that's when I said yes. Because growth doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like an awkward phone call, a hesitant olive branch a Sunday afternoon where nobody raises their voice or hides behind a smile. It looks like choices made with clarity, with self-respect, and with the understanding that you can love someone and still keep your peace. People ask me sometimes if I ever regret missing that family trip, if I wish I'd handled it differently. But here's the truth. That one no became the doorway to everything I didn't know I needed. It taught me that peace isn't found in being accepted by people who only value you when you're convenient. It's found in building a life that doesn't require you to disappear just to belong. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you stop settling for anything less. Summer arrived in Santa Barbara, like it always did, slow and golden, but something in me had changed for good. One morning in June, nearly a full year after that brunch where everything began, I found myself walking along the shore barefoot in the early light, thinking about how far I'd come without ever needing to yell, cut people off, or seek revenge. What I did was quieter, more enduring. I reclaimed my life one boundary at a time. No explosions, just clarity. Just the steady decision to stop asking people to love me correctly and start loving myself exactly as I was. It wasn't a clean ending. My family didn't suddenly become perfect. Emily still had her moments of subtle guilt. My mother still phrased concern like control. But things were different now, and not because they changed first, because I did. They couldn't pull me back into the role I used to play, because that role didn't fit me anymore. And once you outgrow a version of yourself that only existed to please others, no amount of manipulation can shrink you back into it. In late July, we all gathered again, this time for my nephew's birthday. I hadn't been to one in 2 years, not since before Morocco. The energy was familiar. The backyard balloons, the cousins, comparing houses, the small talk, layered with status updates. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I brought Jake a camera, something small, something real. And when he opened it, his eyes lit up. "Like yours?" he asked. "Exactly like mine," I said. He didn't care that I hadn't been there the year before. He didn't care about Facebook captions or group texts. He cared that I was here now on my terms without bitterness. That evening, as I sat under the patio string lights, my dad came over with 2 glasses of iced tea and sat beside me. We didn't talk much at first. Then he said, "I've been thinking a lot about that trip you took. At first I thought it was selfish. Now, I think it saved you." I looked at him for a moment, then replied, "It did. but it also saved us. Because if I hadn't gone, I'd still be showing up angry, pretending I was fine, and quietly resenting everyone here. And that version of me was a slow collapse waiting to happen. He nodded. We didn't know how much we were asking of you. We just kept asking. Because you never said no. I shrugged. That's how the pattern works. Until someone breaks it. He didn't apologize outright. But he didn't have to. I didn't need them to say the perfect words. I needed them to see the change and stop resisting it. And that's exactly what they were beginning to do. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a creative leadership summit in Los Angeles. The theme was boundaries and burnout in the workplace. I told the story, not the messy details, not the family fights, but the emotional truth. How for years I confused being needed with being valued. How I measured my worth by my flexibility. How choosing myself didn't just change my career, it changed every relationship in my life. Afterward, a woman came up to me in tears. I canceled my dream trip to Bali last year because my sister made me feel guilty, she said. Your story just gave me permission to rebook it. I smiled. You don't need permission, but I'm glad you gave it to yourself. That moment stayed with me. Because what happened with my family wasn't unique. It happens every day. At dinner tables, in text threads, in silent expectations that go unspoken but are felt like weight in your chest. And what I want anyone watching this to know is this. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to choose yourself without apology. And the people who truly love you will adjust. Not always easily, not always quickly, but they will, and if they don't, then the loss isn't yours. I didn't become someone else. I became more of myself. The self that doesn't shrink at the sound of disappointment. The self that doesn't cancel dreams to maintain family dynamics. The self that no longer proves anything by showing up everywhere. The self that shows up fully where it matters. And if you've ever felt guilty for simply needing rest, for wanting space, for choosing silence instead of performing closeness, then let my story be the reminder. You're not alone, you're not wrong, you're not broken. You're just finally telling the truth.